We're going to talk about some common psychological traps called fallacies. Every sports bettor should be aware of these. A fallacy is just a wrong or false belief. These can happen to anybody and not just people that are easy to fool. That's why they're so common. In this video, we'll talk about the gambler's fallacy, hot hand fallacy, sunk cost fallacy, and base rate fallacy. Understanding these can help you make smarter decisions and avoid common pitfalls that other people get stuck on. Let's start with the gambler's fallacy, probably the most famous fallacy in betting. So the gambler's fallacy is when we believe that the probability of something happening changes depending on the last thing that happened. So for example, imagine the coin toss for the Chiefs has landed heads 5 games in a row. The gambler's fallacy would have you believe that tails is due next. There have been so many heads in a row, and now it's time for tails. Tails is due. But we can easily see that that doesn't make sense because if the coin isn't weighted, the probability of heads is still 50%. The coin doesn't remember what it landed on last. Where people get tripped up here is by thinking, but the probability of flipping 6 heads in a row is so low. How can it still be 50-50? That statement is true in a way because the probability of flipping 6 heads in a row is about 1.5%. But that's the probability before you ever flip the coin in the first place. Each individual flip by itself is still a 50-50 outcome for heads and tails. Okay, next we have the hot hand fallacy. This fallacy is kind of the reverse of the gambler's fallacy. Instead of believing tails is due after 5 heads, people believe heads is hot, so they bet on heads. That might sound ridiculous, but this happens in sports betting all the time. Think about a basketball player who just made a bunch of 3s in a row. You might think they're more likely to make the next shot because they're hot. This has been studied a lot and turns out to actually not be true. There's no such thing as a hot hand, but we love to believe that there is. You might even be thinking of reasons why I'm wrong right now. The player builds confidence and has a higher probability of making the next shot. They're in some kind of high focus state. But people have looked at the data and the pattern just isn't there. If you're fighting this idea rather than being open to the fact that the hot hand might not exist, that actually speaks to how hard these fallacies are to shake off, even if you're aware of them. All right, next we have the sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy leads us to continue a behavior because we have something invested in it. That investment might be time, money, or effort. This can make us double down on our bad decisions, wasting even more time and money. So many people fall into this in sports betting. Believing you need to bet more to get back your losses, or continuing to believe in a betting system that's failing because you've already put a lot into it, are classic traps of the sunk cost fallacy. Most of the time, it's just better to cut your losses and move on. Okay, last one, the base rate fallacy. The base rate fallacy involves ignoring general information, meaning the base rate, and only paying attention to specifics. Here's an example outside of sports betting. Think about which job fits best with a thin, shy, and organized person. Is that person probably a librarian or probably a farmer? Most people say librarian, but there are 20 times more farmers than librarians, so it's more likely that this person is a farmer. The base rate of farmers is much higher than librarians, but our brain ignores that when we think of the answer here. Let's try another one. Let's say a rookie in a baseball league starts the season with an unusually high batting average over the first few games. If bettors and analysts focus only on these games to predict future performance, they might expect the player to keep up with this high average, ignoring the league's base rate for batting averages, which might be significantly lower. This is going to lead to bad predictions and lost money. Okay, let's recap. The gambler's fallacy involves believing you're due for a win after a set of losses. The hot hand fallacy involves believing you'll continue to win because you're on a win streak. People falling for the sunk cost fallacy continue to put their resources into a bad investment instead of cutting their losses. The base rate fallacy has us ignore general information, the base rate, in favor of specifics, or how good something seems to fit. These fallacies can fool anyone. You might even leave this lesson still believing the gambler's fallacy or the hot hand fallacy. These are hard to leave behind, but the sooner you do, you'll be doing yourself and your bankroll a favor. Recognize these common traps and avoid the same mistakes other people are making. That is everything you need to know about fallacies.